The ocean stretched in every direction, a vast, unbroken void of steel-gray water beneath a sky swollen with unseen weight. I stood at the bow of the research vessel Endeavour, staring at the horizon where the air shimmered with the heat of a dying sun. Our target loomed ahead, a massive, jagged silhouette against the waning light. A prison, an impossible prison. I adjusted the strap of my equipment pack and exhaled slowly. Dr. Elias Carter, marine archaeologist, field researcher, and apparently government errand boy. I had been on plenty of classified expeditions before, but this was different. There were no records of the structure, no maps or references, and yet there it was, a monolithic fortress in the middle of nowhere, waiting for us. The only clue to its existence had been a blurred satellite image and a coded directive from the Department of Oceanic Anomalies. The crew of Endeavour moved with precision, but beneath their professionalism was unease. Dr. Holloway, our lead linguist, clutched her notepad tightly, dark eyes flickering toward the prison's outer walls. Simmons, our field technician, leaned on the railing, mouth tight, fingers twitching against his sidearm. Reyes, our sonar specialist, muttered a quiet prayer under his breath. Captain Dunham, a no-nonsense military operative, was the only one who looked unaffected. But I caught the way his fingers tapped against his belt, a nervous tick betraying his calm exterior. Approaching the dock, Dunham announced. A rusted gangway jutted from the fortress like a skeletal limb, its metal corroded but still intact. No waves lapped against its edges. The ocean around the prison was eerily still, too still. "Looks abandoned," Simmons muttered, scanning the towering walls. "No lights, no movement, nothing." "Was abandoned," Reyes corrected. He turned his laptop screen toward us. The sonar scan displayed the underwater structure, an impossible mass, deeper than it should have been, stretching into unknown blackness. "This thing goes way below sea level. And the weirdest part," he tapped a glowing red cluster on the screen. "There's power. Some of the systems inside are still active." Holloway's grip on her notepad tightened. "Who built this?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. No one answered. We disembarked in tense silence. The moment my boots hit the dock, a strange pressure settled in my chest. It wasn't the weight of the equipment or the stale, salt-tinged air. It was something deeper, something in the bones of the place. We approached the entrance, a massive steel gate, rusted shut. The metal was covered in strange etchings, symbols that spiraled and twisted in ways my eyes couldn't follow. Some looked almost familiar, like they belonged to some ancient language lost to time. Others were completely alien. "Dr. Holloway?" I prompted. She stepped forward hesitantly, tracing her fingers over the carvings. "These aren't just markings," she murmured. "They're warnings." A shiver crept up my spine. Warnings against what? She hesitated, not keeping something in, keeping something out. A low hum vibrated through the steel, deep and almost imperceptible, making the air itself feel too thick. The symbols seemed to pulse. "We need to get inside," Dunham said. Simmons nodded, setting down his pack and retrieving the plasma cutter. The air filled with the sharp hiss of burning metal as the tool ignited, slicing through decades of corrosion and neglect. Sparks cascaded onto the dock, and for a moment, I swore I heard something shift beyond the gate. A scraping sound, a breathless whisper. The gate groaned. Then, with a deafening clank, it swung open on its own. We froze. Simmons killed the cutter. Holloway took a step back. Reyes swore under his breath. A gaping, yawning darkness loomed beyond the entrance. I swallowed hard. Anyone else get the feeling that we just opened something we weren't supposed to? No one laughed. The air inside was different. Colder. Thicker. A subtle, vibrating hum resonated through the floor, as though the entire structure was breathing, alive in ways stone and metal shouldn't be. Our flashlights cut through the dark, beams bouncing off corroded walls and long-abandoned workstations. No bodies, no signs of struggle, just emptiness. I ran a gloved hand over a nearby console, wiping away decades of dust to reveal a cracked monitor, still flickering with power. Reyes, see if you can pull anything from the system. He crouched, pulling out a portable interface to connect to the old-world tech. Jesus, he muttered, skimming corrupted files. These logs, they go back centuries. There are reports here from before the modern era. That doesn't make sense, Holloway whispered. The radio on Dunham's vest crackled. A voice, low, distorted, barely human, hissed through the static. Why did you open the door? The sound chilled my marrow. Dunham yanked the radio from his vest, switching channels. Control, this is Dunham. We have an unidentified transmission. Do you read? Silence. Then a reply. Not from Control, but from inside the prison. I see you. Every flashlight turned toward the darkened corridor ahead. The air felt wrong, pressing in on my skin, sliding beneath it like slithering fingers. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. A soft, rhythmic tapping echoed from somewhere deep inside. Holloway clutched my sleeve. Elias. I turned. She pointed to the floor. Footprints. Fresh. Leading deeper inside. And they weren't ours. A cold sweat prickled my skin. We weren't alone. Dunham signaled forward, his voice tight. Weapons ready. We move. I swallowed my fear and stepped deeper into the dark, knowing that whatever we had awakened was already watching us. The corridor swallowed our light as we stepped inside, the beams of our flashlights struggling against the oppressive darkness. The walls were damp, slick with condensation that smelled faintly metallic. The air carried an unnatural chill, the kind that sank into bone and marrow, whispering of places untouched by time. Dunham took point, his sidearm drawn, the safety off. Simmons trailed beside him, pulse rifle clutched tightly, his breath measured but sharp. Reyes stayed close to Holloway, monitoring his laptop, scanning for any electromagnetic activity. And me? I focused on every shadow, every shift in the silence, each breath growing heavier with the unshakable sensation that we were being watched. The footprints led deeper inside. Their edges were sharp, fresh impressions in the thin layer of dust coating the floor. Human footprints. Barefoot. Could be from a last team sent here. Simmons murmured, though his voice lacked conviction. No records indicate a previous team ever making it inside, Holloway countered. Dunham glanced over his shoulder. Then who the hell left these? No one had an answer. The further we went, the more the prison revealed itself as something impossible. The architecture was an amalgamation of styles, some parts resembling a medieval stronghold, others a brutalist nightmare of sharp angles and reinforced steel. The deeper halls bore strange engravings like the ones at the entrance, twisting and curling in ways that made my eyes ache if I stared too long. Reyes halted, picking up something. We stopped in unison, listening. His laptop emitted a faint beeping sound, its screen pulsing with erratic lines of data. There's an active power source ahead, he continued, adjusting a dial. Localized. Some kind of. The sound of metal scraping against stone cut him off. We spun, weapons and lights trained toward the source. A distant corridor, barely illuminated, stretched into shadow. The scraping continued, rhythmic, deliberate, like nails dragging along the surface. Simmons took a hesitant step forward. Who's there? Silence. A bead of sweat trickled down my temple. I exhaled slowly, forcing my grip on the flashlight to remain steady. Then the sound changed. A whisper, breathy and unnatural, slithered through the corridor. My stomach twisted as my ears registered something profoundly wrong about it. Not just the tone, but the way it reverberated, as if it didn't belong to a single voice, but many layered on top of each other. Holloway swallowed hard. We need to move. Dunham nodded, signaling forward. Stay tight. No stragglers. We pressed on, deeper into the prison, leaving the whispers behind. But they never truly left. Now and then, I caught them again, just at the edge of hearing, growing more distant, but never fading entirely. They weren't following us. They were ahead of us. Minutes stretched into an eternity as we reached a rusted door, half ajar, its hinges warped. Beyond it lay a room filled with ancient consoles, dead monitors, and, most disturbingly, an array of empty chairs arranged in a perfect semicircle around a singular, massive display. Reyes moved first, wiping dust from the screen, eyes scanning the control panels. "This tech is wrong," he murmured. "Looks old. Too old. But there's a modern power grid hooked into it." Holloway stood beside him, her fingers tracing strange inscriptions carved into the workstation. "These markings aren't just warnings. They're instructions." Dunham turned to her. "For what?" She hesitated, brow furrowed in concentration. "Containment." A chill settled over us. Reyes frowned at his monitor. "Hold on." His fingers danced over the keyboard. "I've got a partial data recovery. Some logs are still intact." The screen flickered. Static crawled across it, then cleared, revealing a timestamp message. "Date unknown. Entry: they are awake." A second later, the system crashed. The screen went black, then another whisper. This time not distant. It was in the room. My blood ran cold. We turned sharply, scanning every corner, but nothing moved. Then the screen flickered again, distorted shapes twisting and shifting, forming something akin to a face. Not human, not fully, and it was looking right at us. Dunham reacted first. "We're leaving. Now." We turned, moving as one, but the room had changed. The door was gone. Where it had been was now only a blank wall, smooth and featureless. A sharp clang rang through the space as Simmons slammed his shoulder against the wall. "What the hell?" His voice was tight with panic. Reyes fumbled with his scanner, his hands trembling. This isn't possible. The structure, He stopped, his face going pale. "It's shifting." The air thickened, pressing in around us. My breath came in short, shallow bursts as I reached for my radio. "Endeavor, do you read? This is Carter. We need immediate evac." Static. Then a burst of sound. A voice. Familiar, but wrong. It was my own. "You shouldn't have come." My grip loosened. The radio fell from my fingers, clattering against the floor. My own voice echoed back at me, layered, distorted, stretched into something inhuman. A slow, deliberate knock came from the other side of the now non-existent door. Once, twice, then a pause, then the sound of footsteps, and they were coming closer. Reyes's monitor burst into static, and a new message appeared, the text glitching and stuttering as if the system itself was trying to warn us. "You were never meant to leave." The lights cut out. The whispers swelled, a symphony of voices rising from the very walls, pressing against my skull, burrowing into my thoughts. A shape shifted in the dark. No, not one. Many. Holloway screamed. Dunham raised his weapon. "Move!" We ran. Through the pitch-black corridors, through the impossible twists and turns of a structure that no longer followed the laws of nature. My breath tore through my throat, my heartbeat a relentless drum against my ribs. My flashlight flickered, catching glimpses of things just beyond its reach, elongated figures, limbs stretched in unnatural proportions, mouths too wide, filled with teeth that shouldn't exist. A hand brushed my shoulder. I spun, slamming into Reyes, both of us stumbling forward. He grabbed me, eyes wild. We're in a loop. The realization hit like a hammer to the gut. We weren't escaping. We were being herded. The whispers turned into something worse. Laughter. And then, as suddenly as it had started, silence. We emerged into a vast, circular chamber. At its center stood a single metal chair, bolted to the floor, surrounded by sigils carved deep into the stone. And sitting in that chair was Dr. Holloway. Her head hung low, her arms limp at her sides. But the thing that made my breath catch in my throat was that she had been running beside me just moments ago. I turned, heart pounding. The Holloway who had been next to me was gone. A sound, slow and deliberate, filled the air, the creak of joints, the stretch of sinew, as Holloway's head lifted. Her eyes were wrong. Too dark, too deep. Her lips curled into something that was almost a smile, but not quite. Then she spoke. Not in her voice. Not in any human voice. "You opened the door." Holloway's lips parted, but the thing sitting in the chair was no longer her. The voice that emerged was layered, discordant, an amalgamation of whispers and echoes that made my teeth ache. "You opened the door." Dunham took a step forward, weapon trained, sweat beading on his forehead. "Holloway, can you hear me?" The thing in the chair smiled, but it was wrong, too wide, too knowing. "Do you understand where you are?" My mouth was dry. I glanced at Reyes, whose hands trembled over his scanner, the screen glitching with unreadable symbols. Simmons had his rifle raised, his breath shallow. None of us spoke. The voice continued, still wearing Holloway's shape. "This place is not what you think." I found my voice. "Then what is it?" The thing cocked its head. "A cage. A wound in time. A place between places." The smile faded, and for the first time, something else flickered behind those empty eyes. Amusement? Pity? "You do not belong here." Dunham stiffened. "We were sent here to investigate, to understand." Holloway's head tilted farther, the motion unnatural, like her neck was barely attached. "Understand." The voice rasped. "You're not the first. You will not be the last." The door was meant to remain closed. A deep, rhythmic thud reverberated through the chamber, shaking the floor beneath us. The walls shifted, not physically, but visually, as if they were bleeding into different realities, fragments of impossible landscapes flickering in and out of view. Oceans with no surface. Cities built upon themselves. Creatures with too many limbs, moving in patterns that hurt to comprehend. Reyes gasped, gripping his head. "We have to shut it down." Dunham turned on him. "Shut it down?" Reyes pointed wildly at the sigils surrounding the chair. "This isn't a prison. It's a seal. Something is breaking through." Another thud, this time louder, deeper. The sigils on the ground pulsed, their ancient carvings flickering like a dying signal. The space shuddered, and a wave of nausea swept over me. Something was pushing against reality itself. Simmons took an instinctive step back, rifle barrel shaking. "We need to get the hell out of here." But the Holloway thing spoke again, softer this time. "There is no escape." My pulse hammered. "What do you mean?" The thing, no, Holloway, if she was still in there at all, lifted a trembling hand, fingers twitching as though fighting against an unseen force. Her breath rattled, something bubbling underneath, something trying to surface. The door must be closed. Then her body convulsed. A shriek tore from her lips, but it wasn't human. It was many voices, many screams, all pouring from her throat at once. Her back arched, eyes rolling to white as her form split, layers of her shape peeling away like paper burning in slow motion. I stumbled backward as the room itself tore open. Reality warped, shadows bent at impossible angles. The air grew thick and heavy, pressing against my skin like unseen hands. And then I saw it, a shape, towering, ancient, wrong. It did not belong to our world. It had no form, no shape that the mind could comfortably grasp. But it was there, a mass of writhing nothingness, its very presence bending the space around it. My thoughts fractured trying to comprehend it, like my brain was rejecting what it saw. Dunham was shouting something, but I barely heard him over the raw, thrumming sound that filled the chamber, vibrating in my bones, pressing into my skull. Holloway, what was left of her, turned to me, eyes lucid for just a moment. "Close it," she whispered, "before it takes your name." Then she collapsed. The sigils flickered violently, their glow weakening. The seal was breaking, and when it did, we would not be leaving. Simmons grabbed my shoulder. "Carter, we have to move." But I wasn't looking at him. I was looking at the control panel. The ancient system, somehow still active, flickering erratically with sequences of unknown symbols. A failsafe, a way to close the rift. Dunham saw my hesitation. "Whatever you're thinking, do it fast." I dropped to my knees, fingers flying over the rusted keys. I didn't understand the language, but I understood patterns. A sequence, repeating itself over and over. A countdown I hadn't noticed before. "Carter," Reyes shouted. "It's coming through." The thing in the rift moved, or maybe space itself moved around it. It was shifting, spreading, learning us. And then the impossible happened. It spoke, not in words, not in sound. It spoke inside me. "You were always here." A scream tore from my throat. My hand slammed against the keyboard, finishing the sequence, and the sigils flared brilliant white. The chamber shook. The walls screamed. The rift collapsed. And then, nothing. No sound. No light. No time. Just absence. When I opened my eyes, we were lying on the ground of the same corridor we had entered. The chair was gone. The sigils were dark. And Holloway was nowhere to be found. Simmons groaned beside me, dazed. Reyes clutched his head, eyes unfocused. Dunham was already scrambling to his feet, scanning for threats. The radio on my vest crackled. A voice, faint, distant, familiar. Holloway's voice. "Did you close the door?" My blood turned to ice. Because she wasn't asking us. The radio hissed, then cut to silence. Dunham grabbed my arm, his voice sharp. "We're leaving. Now." I didn't argue. We retraced our steps, the air heavier now, as if the prison had absorbed what had happened. No more whispers. No more footprints. Just an eerie, watchful silence. But as we reached the exit, something caught my eye. A reflection in the steel of the massive gate we had forced open. A figure, standing behind me, not moving, not breathing. And when I turned, nothing was there. We reached the dock in silence, the weight of what had transpired pressing on us like a leaden fog. The Endeavor loomed ahead, bobbing gently in the unnaturally still water. Dunham was the first aboard, scanning the horizon as if expecting something to follow. Reyes stumbled up the gangway, his face pale and slick with sweat. Simmons lingered behind me, his fingers twitching over his rifle. None of us spoke about what we had seen, what we had heard. I hesitated before stepping onto the deck, my breath hitching. The metal beneath my boots fell off, colder than before. I turned back toward the prison, its massive silhouette framed against the roiling clouds. The sigils were gone. The entrance stood open, dark and yawning, as if waiting for something else to step through. Something had changed. "We need to go," Dunham said sharply. I forced myself to move, to follow the others inside. The ship's interior was a stark contrast to the prison. Warm, lit, real. But the relief was fleeting. The static was back. Reyes cursed under his breath as he adjusted the radio. The signal was scrambled, the voices just beneath comprehension. Never left, not closed, watching. I felt sick. Simmons tried the satellite phone. "Dead." "This isn't right," Reyes whispered. Dunham set his jaw. "We'll worry about comms later." We set sail now. No one argued. The Endeavor cut through the water, but the ocean felt wrong. The waves were sluggish, the current seemingly pulling toward the prison instead of away. I stood at the railing, the taste of salt thick in my mouth, my stomach twisting. We weren't moving fast enough. The sky darkened unnaturally. Thick, inky clouds swirled overhead, suffocating what little light remained. Then came a knocking. It started deep within the hull. Faint, rhythmic, deliberate. Reyes shot to his feet, eyes wide. "Tell me you heard that." I did. Simmons ran below deck. A moment later, his voice crackled over the intercom. "No one's down here, but I swear to God, something's moving." Dunham unholstered his weapon. Carter with me. We descended together, the metal steps groaning under our weight. The lower deck was dim, the emergency lights flickering weakly. Shadows pooled in the corners, stretching impossibly long with each sway of the ship. The knocking stopped, and then we saw the door, a rusted hatch, set into the bulkhead where no door had been before. Dunham swore under his breath. This wasn't here. I took a step forward, pulse hammering. The metal was identical to the prison structure. The sigils, they were back, etched deep into the surface, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. Something was on the other side. "Don't," Reyes whispered from behind us. Too late. The hatch burst open. A wave of frigid air surged out, carrying the stench of salt, decay, and something older than language itself. The lights above us failed. The emergency alarm flickered to life, blaring a distorted, garbled warning. And then, we were back inside. The prison walls stretched around us, seamless, infinite. The ship was gone. Simmons choked on a breath, rifle raised. No, we left. We left." Reyes was shaking violently, his mouth moving but no words coming out. Dunham turned in a slow circle, his breathing measured, controlled. It's playing with us. I turned toward where the door had been. The sigils flickered, shifting, rewriting themselves. A warning, a plea, and then the whisper came, soft as a breath against my ear. You were always here. I spun, but there was no one there. The knocking resumed. Closer, from behind us. Dunham raised his weapon, stepping backward. Move. We ran. The corridors twisted, pulsing like a living thing. My footsteps felt wrong, like I was stepping through layers of time itself. I could hear other voices now, some familiar, others lost to ages unknown. We burst into a control chamber, identical to the one before. The same chair sat at its center, occupied, not by Holloway, by me. I stood there, strapped down, eyes vacant, my lips moving without sound. A reflection of myself frozen in a moment I had yet to live. Simmons gagged. Reyes sobbed. Dunham just stared, and the other me slowly turned its head. You were always here. I fired. The chamber collapsed into darkness. The next thing I knew, I was on the deck of the Endeavor, the sky clear, the ocean still. No prison in sight. The others were sprawled around me, disoriented, gasping. Reyes looked at me like I was a ghost. Dunham gripped his gun, his knuckles bloodless. Simmons pointed at the horizon, his voice shaking. It's gone. And he was right. The prison was gone. But deep in my bones, I knew the truth. It wasn't gone. It had moved. Somewhere else. Waiting. And one day, the door would open again. Because it always does.